The year is 2013. You're waking up to watch a new episode of Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and as you sit in front of your TV with a bowl of cereal, boom, Eminence. I remember watching this episode back when it aired and wondering to myself, man, I wonder when they're going to release a figure of this new appearance of Darth Maul. And a few months go by, and Disney buys Star Wars, and as we all know, canceling the Clone Wars in its tracks, including any future releasing of memorabilia like figures and etc. And for a long time, for Clone Wars fans, it felt like there was a drought until recently with the resurgence and revival of the Clone Wars and prequel storytelling. There's been a lot of love for characters of this era. And one of those characters of this era that has been getting a lot has been that Darth Maul from Season 5, specifically in the lines of the Vintage Collection and the Black Series. And that figure is finally here today. And here we have it, Darth Maul in his respective Black Series and Vintage Collection releases. Both these figures have been released rather recently, with the Vintage Collection figure releasing back in August of 2021 and the Black Series figure releasing just recently in January of 2023, just about 10 years to the day of his character's appearance in the Clone Wars with this specific appearance. So it's really nice and crazy to have this character finally in both scales, because growing up, this is the standard, is what we were used to growing up as Clone Wars fans. You know, there was 3 3/4 inch scaled, and then after Disney bought Clone Wars, they introduced the Black Series. Also, very similarly to almost 10 years ago is when the Black Series was introduced. The line's been around ever since. So this video will test as a comparison of sorts, both as a charts of how the Black Series has grown in the last 10 years and also how the Vintage Collection continues to capitalize on every front possible when it comes to their figures. And taking a closer look real quick at the packaging. This is one thing that is actually a little bit different and unique when it comes to the two respective lines. The Black Series on the left is more so a mural art side piece. It is stylized, it is consistent, and you can line it up in a mural if you collect all of them, which I am nowhere near doing so. And significant difference is the Vintage Collection card backs. They are pretty famous now for being the staple of Star Wars figure collecting in the 3 3/4 inch scale. For this version of Darth Maul, he looks amazing. It is a very nice realistic portrayal of Ray Park as he would have appeared in the Clone Wars. So with that out of the way, let us finally get into the video.
You are watching at your speech. I am the Nahal.
And here we have the Vintage Collection Darth Maul. As mentioned, this figure came out somewhat recently, back in August of 2021, and it took its time to get released because it needed it. If you remember and collected back in the days of Season 5 and 4 of the Clone Wars, you might remember some of these later releases of figures that were very few and far between, both in each wave and also in its articulation. On these chicken legs on this Phase 2 Rex, he very much is missing ankle articulation, knees, very limited hips, and not even any wrist articulation. So very stylized, very nice for what it is, and that is a statue in lots of cases. And taking a closer look at the accessories he comes with, it is just simply his double-bladed sabers from the Siege of Mandalore. Fun fact, this first one is actually based off of Visage Ventress's from Dark Disciple. So it's cool to see something from a book make its leap onto a figure of this size and release. But as you can see, it can split apart into 2 separate sabers. No hilt and saber separation, something the Black Series has. And another difference that the Vintage Collection has between releases is the sabers itself. As you see here, Maul's original saber is a bit more gray, and the Asajj redeemed saber is silver. They would go on to apply and fix that in the future release, but we will talk about that more so when it comes up. Starting off, we're going to take a look at the head sculpt here, which is a great adaptation of Ray Park's Phantom Menace look. It is a very nice thing to see an animated figure make the jump faithfully into the live action perspective, and especially when a character already appeared in live action, to bounce back and forth and still be consistent. It's a really cool thing to see. It is uniquely and an entirely new mold to this figure, and to make it even better, it has a dual ball joint at the neck, so you get some really nice, just up and down, all around articulation in his head. Moving down to his torso, he has some pretty good ab articulation. If you really wanted to, you could probably pop this off and have a more faithful Darth Maul figure with just his torso, but that's not what the purpose of this video. His arms can go about 90 degrees if you can get him in the right position. Something somewhat limiting on this figure is just how short and not as tight as an arm crunch would want to be, but it is what it is, and you're still able to get some really good movement out of that. Moving down to his space cargo shorts that he has down here, I never really understood how or why he had these random pockets down there, but that's besides the point. They are very nice as well, all new sculpts, and a really fun thing that I love about these two figures alone is the just realistic ability of seeing Darth Maul's knees. Obviously they're robots and they have gears in the middle of them, and to have a figure, how you build it with these different joints and build itself, it looks just like an actual, you know, how it would be. It makes sense for it to look like they have gears and some discs in there. So it's just really cool to see a practical approach be applied to a figure of this scale. Great paint application where it is, a lot of it actually is sculpted in its figure itself. So all of this brown you see is all the way through brown. It's not really painted. The shoulder pads are, but the tunic and the chest, that is all cast in its original plastic with only the details being added on. The belt is missing, honestly, a little bit of its paint, but it's nothing that you wouldn't be able to go in and add through dry brushing. We will do some more direct comparisons, but as a whole, this is a great figure and some very, very great possibilities you can have with it. So moving on to the Black Series figure. And here we have the Black Series Darth Maul as seen in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. He is, by just about every means necessary, the same figure as the Vintage Collection in regards to the portrayal and accessories he comes with, but just a lot more crammed into it, being a 6-inch figure. And talking about those accessories, we will take a quick in-depth look at those right now. As mentioned before, we have his double-bladed saber as seen in the Siege of Mandalore, and also as mentioned before, this is a corrected color scheme for the hilts itself. The original Maul saber was a bit more gray, and now it is a consistent silver with the redeemed Asajj saber. And another aspect that I really like about the Black Series is the fact that these sabers are very modular. They are able to be broken apart like this with a little friction, and you have these two, and then you also can remove the hilts from the blades like so. But these also act as a negative because, as you saw, those are pretty tough to take out, and those are rather small looking pegs to go into the hilt itself. And many a times people have had figures take shelf dives, and these hilts will snap off in the hilt itself. I really like the fact that we got an Asajj Ventress redeemed saber from the book Dark Disciple. I love Quinlan Vos and that last Clone Wars story arc in general, so to see something from that book not only be brought back into the Clone Wars in a final season, hurrah, but in the Black Series as well, it's just really cool to have that piece of literature lore in the Black Series. And taking a closer look at the head sculpt here before we move on, he is a little bit more on the animated side of accuracy. He does not look as much like Ray Park does on the Vintage Collection release, but the Black Series has been having an identity crisis for the last, I don't know, existence of its entire line of, is it a realistic portrayal or is it a realistic animation merge in between the two? And this one very much more balances the line between animated and realistic versus things like the Clone Trooper heads and some other figures, but it is a very, very good and expressive face for Maul himself. It is, again, an entirely new sculpt from head to toe, including this head sculpt. So some people have said he is smirking, some people said he's given a grimace, some people say he doesn't have much of an expression at all. And I remember looking at pictures and feeling a little uneasy about the face sculpt itself, but after handling it, and specifically as a figure photographer, casting just some different light on the face, you can get these different emotions and parts of the face to show through just a little bit better. So it is a very dynamic face as well as it is a figure. And then lastly, to talk about the head, you have to be a little bit mindful of the head spikes. The head spikes are actually rather tough and not sharp, but I tried taking off the head just to take a better look at the double ball joint neck, and it was kind of tough to get it back on without crushing those horns down onto the head and also not leaving too much of an imprint on my hands itself. But moving down to the rest of the figure, he has great sculpt work on the rest of his torso. A really cool thing that specifically he has is a double jointed articulation, and as you just saw in real time, he also has a lightsaber holder on the side of his waist, but I really do not care. You saw it fall off. It does not hold well at all. But the rest of the figure is able to hold its positions very well and hold these different poses very, very well. As mentioned before, in the vintage collection, it was more of a 90 degree angle articulation for the elbow, but here it is just a little bit more sharper and deep cut than that. He has great molding on the rest of his torso and down to his space cargo shorts. They look as magnificent as ever and has a little bit more detailing on his belt. And again, my favorite part of this figure really is just how well the knees look. It's a robotic lower torso, so it makes sense to see these gears of a figure be practical in nature. So to see a knee go like this in a Black Series figure, sometimes it can look unsettling, but for a figure like Maul, where he's supposed to have gears and, you know, these kind of more mechanical undertones, it really looks well. Maul is able to get into some very well deep poses and balances very well as a figure. He has some very stable lower leg articulation to hold these dynamic poses as you would expect a figure like this to have. It is a very solid and hefty figure in comparison to the vintage collection. That's just the reality of dealing with a scale that's a 6-inch scale compared to a 3 3/4 inch, but this figure certainly has the heft and the weight that you would expect of a figure of this variety to have, and just feels very, very solid. He handles very smooth and seamlessly. The only thing that I kind of don't like is how the toe or ankle rockers, they are on a ratchet joint, so you have to go between 1 or 2 and try to balance if you really want to get anything else other than those 2 levels of articulation. But other than that, this is a really remarkable figure in almost every way possible. And closing off some finishing remarks here on these 2 figures, both have some great strengths and honestly do not have that many weaknesses other than the ones pointed out here in the video, and also just the accessibility of these figures alone. The vintage collection figure, even though it released back in 2021, is still somewhat easy to find on sales online and in different online stores. And another aspect that I really love about the vintage collection is the reality behind the world building itself. I have found these figures pretty easily on either stores or just gifts in general over the recent months, and have a rather nice Siege of Mandalore / Clone Wars Season 7 display thanks to the vintage collection, one that we certainly do not have in Black Series yet, as there is no standard Death Watch Mandalorian, nor is there a Jesse in the line yet, and even though that Jesse was inaccurate, he is a lot more easy to customize than the upcoming Black Series one with the still inaccurate helmets. So the vintage collection certainly has the diversity rounded off. in that boat. However, at the end of the day, I have to give it to the Black Series, as if you were only able to get one of these figures and not even worry about trying to world build, this figure has so much engineering put into it, care and appreciation when it comes to the paint applications and just scaling of it all together. I feel like this is one of the best Black Series figures we've had in a long time, and the fact that it is just about 10 years ago to the release of the Black Series line, and looking back at the original Darth Maul that came out back then, sure, there's not as many accessories, but this figure is a mark up in so many different ways, with the added butterfly joints, the increased arm cuts, and the head sculpt alone is great. So it is a very worthy pickup, and although you're not able to really see that much with it in my collection, he goes pretty decently with a Clone Wars Super Commando back there, and that's how he's going to be displayed in my collection. And that about wraps things up. I hope I did both these figures a credit to their respective advancements. They are such great figures in their own regard, and if you are a TVC fan and feel like I might have slighted you guys a little bit and not given you enough credit, just I have some other ideas brewing in the noggin for some more figure review / culture discussion videos. So be patient, and I appreciate your time you spent on this video. Thank you so much for supporting my creative process that I am going through here on YouTube. It's so fun to actually take a jump into this platform and finally give back into something that I've been watching for oh so long. So thank you again so much for your support. Any feedback's appreciated, and have a good one. Finally starting up a channel, I see. Good for us. Let's see how long this one lasts.